Hey, I'm reading from one I got as a kid. Uh, this is Second Samuel 22, verse 1. And then, I got a headache right now. I was leaving work and had a whole garage door fall on my head. Um, Luckily, it hit me right on the crown instead of somewhere where I was already split. I had my wig split last week and back, last month. So I was not trying to get hit in the head, and my eyes been bothering me. Maybe I don't know if it's watering because there's something in it, but it might be because it's not blinking enough, because neurological reasons or something. Who knows? I wish I did. I can't figure it out. So let me know if it looks like this side of my face isn't moving enough. It looks like this is correct. No, this is incorrect. So this is doing the reflex mode. So this should all be backwards. Yeah, that's backwards. Yeah, this is reflecting. So it'll look like it's my left side, but it's really my right for y'all. So let me know. Uh, they do that so when I think they say it's easier for people when they're trying to do a selfie to go the right direction, for it to pilot in the right direction. Back a long time ago, Mark Twain, he I don't know how he became a pilot. He said he had a rough comeuppance, but somehow some carpetbaggers could go down and kind of become pilot. He said you can make a good living being a pilot of a riverboat, and he took that Proud Mary rolling down on someone else's boat and learning from him. But if it was that easy, just get to know somebody and you could earn a good living. I don't know. I think actually that was before the war, but after the war, he had to stop. I can't remember exactly, but that part didn't make sense to me. How Mark Twain was able to get in and nobody else was. But it says that in Second Samuel, David saying these words, a song to the Lord, when the Lord had rescued him from the grasp of his enemies and from the hand of Saul. This is what he's saying. And this happened. Um, this happened quite a bit later than he was actually delivered. And uh, this is when he was delivered, maybe from his son Absalom. But either way, Absalom represented Israel, and as did Saul. And the Bible Project's been doing a good job of talking about the firstborn and how the firstborn is more a title. So when it says like Jesus, the firstborn of all creation, that's his title. But firstborn doesn't always mean literally. It's what came to be. So maybe the Egyptians were the firstborn, but the Israelites succeeded them and replaced them, especially in their northern jurisdictions. And especially during the time of Saul, you'll see in a couple chapters over from here, we're at 2 Samuel 22. You only got two more chapters of Samuel and several in Kings, and you're already 6 chapters over and talking about how in the Septuagint the Pharaoh had given Solomon. David's passed by then just recently, and he starts building the temple soon thereafter. But he gets this grant of certain regions along the southern border that David had kind of broached up against. And uh, anyways, we went through David and going living with the Philistines and everything, and we got into how that Israel was these kind of Levitical, Hyksos priestly caste, as Shapiro said, but and Ezra 1,000 years later really harkens to this as being a Levite, as were the Hasmoneans and the Sadducees are very much the Samaritans based around these Torah focused priests who lived in cities and allied amongst kings. And but there's Moses being different than Aaron, kind of represents the Deuteronomist in that he's you know okay, that's the last time I'm saying the whole video over. That's the last time I'm saying I caught myself doing that and I need to stop. But uh this is like the prophet, and the prophet, like Amos. Did I just say it? I think I did. Amos being out in the wilderness and God's presence going east. And when it says in Ezekiel 16, or was it 23, your older sister, referring to Israel, that's for good reason, that even though Judah is older and represents first in the New Testament, so when the prodigal son and the apostle talk about, oh, how is it fair that the one who stayed home, the early morning worker, that didn't squander, I just said it again, and he just wanted his just due, like a chief seat. And there is that for Judah, but this isn't true for the time of David. When it's the time of David, there was not really a kingdom of Judah per se. There was all these scattered tribes in the wilderness up against the wilderness of Caleb and the wilderness of Nod and the wilderness of the Mizraim and the wilderness of the Amalekites and so on and so forth. So even the Philistines, the ones that weren't in settled lands, would venture out, because it says that for all this time there was Philistines there, but in all reality it was more so after the Sea People, where Cretans could, kind of, I said it again, Cretans could kind come over and with their long phalanxes and bronze helmets push people into the wilderness. And so it's kind of anachronistic, but this is allegedly why everyone's coming from the south and the west to enter into this land on the eastern coast of the Mediterranean, and continue to be so ever since. I think David or somebody, there's biblical stories of going, across the Jordan or around the Jordan and up through the land of the Ammonites, and how the Moabites rebelled and the Midianites and all this. And of course, you have Nahash, and you probably had Og in times of old, and I said it again. Okay. I just gotta stop saying that. It's like a habit. Just saying like is a habit. Or just one of those things we does. And we do it as a space holder for people to not talk while we're talking, and there's no reason to do so, when I'm literally the only one talking, so it's especially inappropriate. And I'm just here in. But oh yeah, so I said all that to talk about Psalm 18, but I was talking to get into it about Genesis 19, and this is a story of sulfur and ashes poured on the descendants of Lot's environment in a way. And so east of the Jordan has never been quite as nice as west of the Jordan. In general, being around the sea can have humidity and rain enough to have plants that make it favorable to live there and grow crops there in a settled way. And kind of east of the Jordan is where Judah is older than Benjamin, as Esau is older than Jacob, as Ishmael is older than Isaac. And Isaac's a very peculiar story because what he does is so much smaller than Abraham or Jacob, whom he's betwixt, and nothing he does is not found in the stories of the ones on the outer edge, namely Abraham and Jacob. And these stories have parallels in even Ham maybe being older, and also Cain being older, and Cain, of course, Reuben, but Reuben and Levi are brothers of Judah. And there's this story about how the mothers of Rachel, the mother, I said it again, because I wanted to refer to Rachel weeping for her children and the great tribulation that it happened under the Herodians mentioned in the Gospel of Matthew, but instead of going there in my head, I said don't go there, and I threw in that kind of filler and tried to stay on track, but now I'm losing track again. So it's this constant trade-off, but uh so when they're going around this eastern Jordan, Transjordan area, as they did in Lawrence of Arabia and other times too, as David did. David also, surrounded the Jebusite city, and he took Ammon. But other than the Jebusites, I really fail to see whom David allows. I mean, I guess he's got a Canaanite living down by the threshing floor between where David City and Solomon City were. Because David City, he wasn't really. Zion apparently is south of the old city, and it's hard to tell because during Herodian era, they had built up that whole, I guess, dried up wadi valley, and where the dung gate is to the old city, and the sheep, not the sheep gate, but the, I can't remember, but he had built up that a big wall right there as being part of the fortress. And so when the Romans came, they came like everyone else from the south side, and that's where that's where the cliffs were high. and that's where they just have to kind of end the city because of this cliff. And during Yom Kippur they might throw a goat down the cliff or something, but it was quite a ways. And they kind of, I said it again, focused or oriented themselves eastward because that's where the glory of the Lord went. And the Lord's going to come, but they also believed in this another David to come, and this person would be God's arm uh, from the wilderness coming back. But it kind of relates to who Judah is in this whole thing in the first, and that is the same character as Edom, because this is the story of Ham and Cain and everybody else being kicked out to the wilderness. And lo and behold, the wilderness was between where they were looking and where the exiles were sent to, the Judahites to Babylon. And this is where a lot of this was being formulated from. I mean, it's like they knew the legends of Babylon and had the writings of Babylon to look at through the auspices of the Persian Empire, who completely annihilated, making everything true, like Isaiah and Jeremiah and everybody were saying that Babylon would one day be destroyed. But a lot of newspaper theologians and reggae musicians and everyone else will, call anybody they don't like Babylon, which means the one that will be destroyed. And the New Testament authors are just as guilty as anyone with the Mystery Babylon. But they're telling you it's Mystery Babylon because it's obviously not Babylon. So it's got another name. So it's more like what Babylon symbolizes. But anyways, the diction's a little different in 22, as I read it from the NAB of chapter, I said 22, but this is a book, 2 Samuel. And it corresponds to that verse in particular, verse 1, corresponds to verse 1 of chapter 18 of Psalms, the Psalm David. And this one's for the leader. And this is maybe the leader of the choir. I don't know who the choir was. They might have been Gibeonite eunuchs. I don't know. So, a Psalm of David, the servant of the Lord, who spoke unto the Lord the words of this song in the day that the Lord had delivered him from the hands of all his enemies. Well, in the context of that, it was his son, Israel. And Israel represents the Gentiles. So, like, if you read Joshua and different stuff, they'll tell you that that Abraham came from a pagan nation. His father had all these idols. I mean, Laban had idols. He was a relative. And that's why Abraham was so scary, because he was like in a foreign nation. He was a Hebrew. He had come over across the river, had been from Babylon, proto-Babylon, Turkey, or whatever he was from. He was from, where Ezra was from. He was from east of the Euphrates, to where it was rather nice. It wasn't like the desert between the two regions. And me turn this down. So David, so Israel represents the nations because that's who the Hyksos priests were. They were the Canaanites, and this is where they inherit a lot of these Torah traditions from, these Samaritans. But the Judahites coming, getting very popular with Ezra and along the Second Temple period, they represent something different. This prophet was always coming to the kings of Israel, like Ahab, and the prophets were not very favored. I said it again. So, I was talking about how Esau was hated by his mother. That's why, I said it again. He had to go up and live. Jacob had to go up and live with Laban, and he got tricked. But he had 2 wives because he had to go work 7 years for this shepherd, his uncle, for his daughter Rachel. But he ended up getting the firstborn, Rachel or Leah. So he kind of hated her in a sense, and he would want to spend his nights with Rachel. And I don't know what, for whatever reason, it's kind of maybe one of those things like Sarah, where, here's Hagar. Maybe one of them was more fruitful, so that's why he's sleeping with Leah. But eventually, it was just cut off. Rachel said no more. But then they worked out this deal. Reuben was going to help Rachel get pregnant because they had these figs that had these magic powers to do that, and only her, and I guess women weren't allowed to go outside or something, so she had to, I guess, John 2, the mother says that he's going to turn the water into wine, and he does. Well, I guess this belief is, if your mother says to do it, you got to do it. So Reuben was, of course, expected to go pick these mandrakes because his mother, Leah, the hated wife, is going to have her son pick these things for Rachel to get pregnant. And it worked, but they both wind up pregnant. And there's all these parallels. There are all these parallels between the Edom stories and the Ishmael stories and what's going on here. And Reuben, same thing. The stories of Dinah, all these kind of mid-30s chapters of Genesis, I'd say are later interpolations from the Judahite source of the Second Temple, like the Deuteronomists and stuff, more so than the earliest. And the earliest is the Elohist, these Canaanites that were the original Hebrews. That were represented Israel. And that's the story of Abraham halfway before the Deuteronomists had made Abraham like he wanted him to be, an Adam's character, Isaac, and things like that. What he wanted to do, the original story of Abraham, was supposed to be the story of this guy who had come from this far land and gave up his old ways, his fathers, to be adopted by God and enter into this kind of relationship with him. And this God is kind of a dark horse of sorts because he's not really seen by anybody else. I guess he's dealing with some, he's up in heaven most of the time, and I guess he's dealing with some Amorites in Jerusalem or something, or Bethel or whatever they're having you believe. I'd say this original story probably Bethel in the north, but que sera sera. So here we go. So when he says, when David says, "When you save me from Saul," let's see what it says in the Hebrew. I'm reading from the subsidized JS. When I said Psalm 1, Psalm 18, verse 1, that's Psalm 1 in our normal Bible, our Christian Bible. Even though King James relied for the Old Testament, rely on their changes, Psalms. By definition, if it was written by, how do I keep saying this? If it was written by, I think it's because there's certain things I can't say. I didn't want to say there's certain things. So I had to change direction. That's the problem with live. And the reason I didn't say that is because people get so offended by these kind of things. And so because it's said by a Jewish person, is what I wanted to say. But because it's said by a Jewish person, it is written by God. That's a definition to these Masoretes. And so they're going to take titles that they believe to be part of the original text and turn that into the Word of God, so that when we read it, we think God means written by Jewish people. It's part of a psychological trick. And so verse 1 is in the Masoretic, just the intro. And it says here in the Masoretic, verse 1, it says Yahweh many times over. I mean, Yahweh's mentioned several times in this one verse. So when they the Bible, I don't know really what that means, because it's right here in the Bible 4 times in a single verse. And I want to point out one word in particular. The word Saul, it's shin and sh, because they put the code at the front, which is the back in English of the letter, and that lets you know it's like the name Sade, the singer. It's one of those S's. And in English, they put a little caret, kind of an upside down caret above the S in this version, to indicate it in the English. And this is true for the word Saul and the word that I'm going to show you in verse 5 in the Masoretic, verse 5 in the English, verse 6 in the Masoretic. And it says there's a kamatz under the shin. So that's going to tell you to make it, according to this English rendering, a long A. Sha, sha, sha. Duvid will say it's an U. So shu, shu, shu. And then the A, they're saying, I don't know what that symbol is. Do I have my code out? I think they're saying that that's kind of like a skip. You don't pronounce that A, because they're saying the vowel on the S is going to do that for you, I think is what they're trying to say. All right, let me look at these code real quick. No, I'm not seeing this. Must be a special case. I mean, they're doing this special case. I mean, I can't trust it. It's like if they need to make a special case to make it at all possible, then it's entirely likely that there's nothing real there. Especially when we realize that, and the last, just to wrap this up, the last two don't have any code. They do put the dot in. They do embed the dot into the wa, and this is a Yiddish kind of thing because they've used the wa to make a B sound or a V sound, and so they want to distinguish because they'll also have the B make a V sound and different things. So they and the P and the F, then to make speak German words and English words, they need an F. So they've made and a P. So they've made a bifurcation of the Hebrew to be able to pronounce different vowels and things like this, but and consonants rather. But the code weren't developed until after the Quran had been written, so that they could have some examples of how to speak Aramaic and write it with kind of an example of a written. So it was not developed until much later. So I can't make any arguments off of the code. I do admit that there could be a difference to speakers, but the difference I would argue couldn't be so great that a misunderstanding, especially for something so written and specific, could be averted, in such a simple way. I don't think, I can't believe I just said that again. I don't think people would be naming their children awful names just because you know how to pronounce it. And I see right here Shaul, 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 Shaul. That's what I see. But if I turn all the way to, how is this verse 1? I'm confused. And he said, oh, they're actually giving you verse 1 at the end of here. I love you with all my strength. That's verse 1. And I mean, it's confusing, but so I really need to turn to verse 5, 6 in the Masoretic. This is the same verse. And what is this psalm about? This psalm's about how God came down. And the commentaries will tell you it's like he's still up there in heaven, which I don't understand how, because didn't they just have all this thing where because he goes with the ark, he's abandoned, the ark's gone, but somehow he's way up in heaven and devil may care where the ark is. And I'd like someone to tell me that, because I guess I'm not really sure too much of the context of 2 Samuel 22 right now. I'm not too sure. I don't have a good memory anymore. So I'm here in verse 5, 6 in the Masoretic. I'm done. I'm kind of done with the subsidized JPS for now, but let me. It says here, Tehillim, they say here, and it says here, verses 44 and 45. Thou hast delivered me from thy contentions of the people. Thou hast made me head of the nations. A people whom I have not known serve me. As soon as they hear of me, they obey me. The sons of a stranger dwindle away before me. The sons of a stranger fade away. And I think that's what we were kind of discussing in my last video. Or was I watching somebody else? I don't remember. But in my last video, I think we're talking about the Ammonites. But the funny thing about the Ammonites, well, so what I was going to say is David come from the south, take the Ammonites, and the Ammonites had rebelled maybe. But I think I'm more speaking of the Moabites. Oh, the Moabites had rebelled, so he gets the Ammonites and the Edomites to join him, which seems to be his usual confederacy in a sense. I mean, it's all strange. There's a king of Edom, but he's subservient to David, but yet they're not independent. And somehow David's independent. It's king of Judah when there's a king of Israel. It's all very, very confusing. But I think it's intentionally so, because it's not supposed to be an understanding of the facts. It's supposed to be an understanding of the feelings. Nothing more than feelings. And it says here in verse 5, you have that same shin, but it's like with a different vowel. Instead of the kamats, is that it's Zadie? I think that's called a Zadie. Zadie. Let me see. Zeri. No, that's not Zeri. For Sheol, which one is that? Shwa. So if Shwa is a very short one, so it's and what do they do with the olive? That's crazy. They give you another ad hoc special case. That's when you know something funny is going on. It doesn't even come on this list. Is that supposed to be another omission sign, or just do whatever secret? That's the secret sign. It's like, oh, only the secret trained people know how to do this one. So we can't explain to you how it's different, but just trust us. We admit that the aleph doesn't even make any sound, and it's the exact same letters. Oh, but we put the dot on top of the O in Sheol, the dot that was never there for thousands of years. Oh, they have that same ad hoc in the code in the word snares too. It says Moakshi. But Sheol is, you can't say Sheol, because like in that Musaki word, it's like there's a schwa next to it. So because there's not a schwa, a wa next to it. So that's also corresponds to this Sheol with that same kind of, right angle looking thing, that's going to be 2 next to a wa. So maybe that's to indicate it makes no sound, no vowel. I would say the same thing happens in Arabic. And the first letter is a, so the last word, they want to say that kamats makes an e sound or an a sound. Shaw, kamats, kamats, shaw. And they're shawl, and they're not really putting any vowels below the last 2 letters in either word. But nonetheless, they're saying when you make that dot above, it's gonna make a W sound. Sheol, Sheol. That was not even there. That was not even there. So they're saying with the schwa, it's making the shortest vowel possible. So Sheol, 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 Sheol. Another one, Sheol, Shaul, Shaul. But you'd have to use these in the code to be able to know. And we're only four verses later with exact same letters in Hebrew. The exact same letters. Sheol surrounded me. The snares of death confronted me. And so, if you read the story of David and Saul, this is how this is how it went down. He was living in his house, married to his daughter, and being his instrument boy and his armor carrier and everything else. When meanwhile, he was a play for me boy, and David would get out his little flute or his harp or whatever, and he would play for the king, and it would cause him amusement or merriment, and eventually Satan came into him, and it would cause him anger, and he would persecute David and try to kill him, and he'd throw arrows at him, and he would just narrowly escape. And he was eventually able to, they almost have you think divine intervention, be able to have Saul fall on his own sword, so he didn't even have to hurt him. He could have hurt him all these times. Saul gets delivered to David all these times, but David says, "No, you're my Lord," and so on and so forth. And I think that this isn't even saying Sheol. I think that's something the Masoretics added by putting the vowels in there, and that is because it said Saul when it says, instead of saying the cords of Sheol surround me, I think it's saying the destructions of Saul surround me. And that is because Saul was going to kill him. But Saul isn't like a real person. Nobody like names their kid Saul. So what do I think about Saul of Tarsus? Like, I do think he more likely than Jesus Christ to be a historical figure that existed in time, but I'm not convinced he is. He very well could have been a literary figure based on Josephus, a kind of religious version, a religious writer that is basically playing the role of Josephus. And we don't really have evidence of the things that Paul did being true. But nonetheless, I do think that Mark and all of the New Testament is based on books like Romans and Galatians and things that Paul or somebody writing as Paul uh, had wrote. And do I think could grave? It's really hard to say. I would say maybe as like as kind of maybe like I don't know. It'd have to have some religious or military um, connotation, but no, I continue to make these same arguments, and I believe the New Testament does too. The New Testament, when it says Edom, will translate it mankind, Adam. They're not giving credence to the Nakud, and that's because the Nakud didn't exist. And I don't think it's because this is foreigners reading the Bible, and if you pronounce it, then you know. I do think there are differences in pronunciation. Like you can have a they're saying the aleph doesn't make any sound is what they're telling you, and especially in these cases, especially in these cases. But I know full well that in Arabic they have the Y sound for the aleph sound in some cases, and you do this with the vowel, the added vowels. And I think when they did first develop the Quran, they didn't have these vowels, but soon thereafter. And um, this helped non-native speakers be able to speak it as it became spread amongst non-Arabs. And in Canaan, they followed suit. In Galilee and all that, they followed suit. In the Tiberian school, where they developed a sort of equivalent system. But I don't know. I think that you're saying, "Oh, I was surrounded by Sheol," and that's because this literary figure represents death to David, and David's going to not have a chance at life when he's exiled, and like the scapegoat, like Jesus. Um, he's a wanted man, so he's has to lay low, hide out in caves, hide out amongst the enemies and things of the sort. And but God delivered him, so he was feeling, oh my God, why have you forsaken me? And this is where we get some of those psalms from. But it's always been curious to me how he's saying, oh, I'm the head of the nations. I'm the head of the nations. Well, he really just, I mean, the nations he became head of were mostly just the children of Lot, who were Hebrews. They came with Abraham. Lot did. And if you look at the Hebrew, every time it talks about the Ammonites, it literally just says, "My children, my children." That's God speaking, and it's not that they're like that. It's not that Ammonites is where we get the name children from. It's the opposite. When the children of Ammon were born, they had the same. Their father and mother were from the same family, and at that time, it was all about, oh, Jacob, you got to marry family. Isaac, you got to marry family. Da, 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 da. Oh, Judah, you didn't marry family, but none of those kids lived, so that doesn't matter. And what was I saying? Oh yeah, so because they had the mother and father from the same family, they're called. Oh, they're born in my children. Basically, babies having babies. It's my children had my children, and you can read all about that in Genesis chapters 19 and 20. But anytime it says in the Masoretic, where anytime in our King James and everything it says Ammonites, it says in the Masoretic, my children. And so David, like, yeah, great king, the biggest Israel's ever been, the most united it's ever been, except for maybe the days of Solomon, which is in the same span of 50 years or whatever. Other than this time, being fragmented and cake half turned and this and that. Out of all this time, okay, uh, so how is he the head of the nations? Well, he's the head of the Ammonites, other Hebrews, people like his ancestors, when it came with their ancestors. That's how Jewish people speak. They will say us when they mean the people in the Bible. So I was using that in their way, but um, that's how rhetoric works. But sometimes my sarcasm is kind of dry, but nonetheless, um, the people that were possessed, it says, you know, sorry, it was just I said it again. Took the sackcloth and spread it out for herself on the rock, beginning to harvest, rained down from the sky, fending off the birds. Sky settling down the way, the wild animals by night. When David was informed of what Rizpah, Iar's daughter, concubine of Saul, had done, he had obtained the bones of Saul and his son Jonathan from the citizens of Jabesh Gilead. Jabesh Gilead. Well, that's a very important place. That's like in Moab and Ammon. And he'd have to fight against the Syrians and the Armenians in this area. But he basically united all the Hebrews under a single kingdom. Under the time of David, the sons of Lot and the sons of Esau and all these other Hebrew groups were under the control of David. But as far as like other nations, like no, I don't think he controlled Trans Euphrates or Damascus or Egypt or anything of the sort, you know. And um, so when it says in the Masoretic that, like it says here, um, all right, it says here in Psalm 18 verses 43, "You've made me the head of the nations, and the people I've not known shall serve me." This is when he gets delivered from Saul, when he's the king of Israel. The foreigners submit to me. This is my sons. My sons. The foreigners fade away and have come frightened from their hideouts. That's my sons. My sons. All right, let's go to in the Hebrew. So this is the story of the second born in Ezekiel 23, the second born daughter. You know, the in this time period she wasn't the wayward son. She was the one who was adopted. Like Israel was adopted when Abraham became a nation. This happened to the desert dwellers of Amos's day when they kind of leveled up by this wilderness experience and were much wiser, like the wisdom of Taman, they used to say. And it says here in verse 44 in the Hebrew, Benye, and he says this right after he takes over Israel from Absalom. And Absalom, that means my father's peace. And he, or maybe my father, Jerusalem. And well, oh yeah, what I was going to say about Genesis 19, these stories that talk about the Ammonites are really talking about Israel, because Israel is Benjamin. Benjamin is Jerusalem, and this becomes David's homeland. And Benjamin sits right between Ephraim and Judah, and Benjamin is a son of Rachel. And so when Judah comes to power, when Edom comes to power, this is taking Judah. This is, oh God, I keep on doing that. It's taking from the Jebusites being the nations. But the nations is Israel. That's how Israel is formed. And that's how Judah took the place of the firstborn from the position of the secondborn. So yes, Judah is the firstborn in the New Testament for all intents and purposes. Judah is the firstborn. But Judah is from the desert of Idumea. And that only came through the sins of Israel and them losing the favor of God when David took over. Well, David took over from Saul. He'd have David had gotten eaten by a lion by now if it wasn't for God's favor. So God put him there and gave him the role of the priest, and that role was the sacred fire. And people like David and Solomon had such a God-given role for that sacred fire that they could call it down from heaven. And they were able to, not have to even wear the clothes. They could be bucky naked and still making Holocaust offerings and things like this. And these offerings represent the death of the firstborn. And that to the Israelites was the Egyptians. and that's where the Hyksos got the land from. They took it from the Egyptians. So that was the original firstborn. And these shepherd people would kill their animals and eat them, which gave them an ability to survive out in the wilderness, which gave them independence. And that's where nobody could see the fires of metallurgy too. So as Israel went out of the wilderness into Moab, originally with Moses, they were able to make these tools of metal from the gold of the Egyptians, so that when they took Jericho, they had already forged these weapons way out in the desert where nobody could see them. And this is what happened much later with the Judahites from Babylon. They were able to come up through the desert and across the Jordan and take Canaan. And so this is a story of Benjamin. If you look at Genesis 19, the story of the sons of Lot and how they're controlled by David, this is the story. These are parallel stories because when he says, "Oh, all the nations belong to me," he's talking about controlling all the Hebrews only, and that is what Jerusalem is right now, because Jerusalem is Benjamin, and David didn't control Jerusalem in the beginning. And so when we refer to Judges 19 as a story that's very reminiscent of Sodom and Gomorrah, it has all these same elements of these angels coming to stay with him. Well, these angels in this story weren't, the Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. They were like a Levite priest and a Judahite man or something like that. And they were just traveling through Benjamin. And the Benjaminites, just like the people inside of Gomorrah, said, "Oh, let us, have our way with this man from Judah or something." And he goes like, "No, just take my daughter or whatever." Who he was staying actually with his father-in-law. So this house he was staying at was in Benjamin, was his father-in-law's house. And he he said, "No, just take my daughter," and they did and whatnot. And then she died, and this was like Jesus riding in on the horse. She rides back in, for her death, and dies right there. And it says thereafter that they got wives for Benjamin because nobody could ever marry Benjamin again. So that's why people like Paul will say, "Oh, I'm from the tribe of Benjamin," because there could be this belief that nobody would have married Benjamin other than Benjamin because of Judges 19. Though there's no reason to believe that he actually was a son of Benjamin. It's just people say that today. They say, "Oh, I'm a son of Asher," "I'm a son of this or that." Just like saying I'm the son of Isaac or I'm the son of Abraham. It's just a belief. There's no facts involved. And so that's what David did. He ended up fulfilling the promises, the messianic promises, and that's how David was able to David was able to unite everyone. But this is really a story of Herod, how he was able to gather all these Ammonites and Moabites and stuff together. But they weren't called Ammonites and Moabites. They knew who they were. They knew that they were the Aramaic speaking enemies of the Roman Empire. That here comes the Romans from far away. They don't speak like us. They don't dress like us. They eat different, this and that. And then they're trying to tell us what to do. And Rome ended up embracing these ideas. So when you have these stories of being the scapegoat or being kicked out, like Esau was, and how the firstborn was, well, Rome embraced these traditions. Their founders, Romulus and Remus, are reminiscent of being kicked out and not being favored and being read, and all sorts of unclean birds right along in the storyline. So they're both sides are polarizing. They are in kind of this death race, and it culminated a few times over in the first, second, and third Jewish Roman wars. But I just wanted to read like one more thing, and I'm gonna get off here. All right, Psalm 110:1. So it says, "The Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I make your enemies my footstool." This is a very popular verse because Jesus quotes it, I think, in John 10, and we all know it. Sit at my right hand until I make, Lord, sit at my Lord, sit at my right hand until I make your enemies your footstool. But his enemies only became, the only people that became at his footstool seemed to be Benjamin, Ammon, those kind of people. But if we turn from there all the way to 1 Samuel 26, and the verse is 16. So it says on verse 16 of 1 Samuel 26, "This is no credible service you have performed. As the Lord lives, you people deserve death because you have not guarded your Lord, the Lord's anointed." So it says, "have not guarded your Lord, the Lord's anointed." Uh-oh. So you'll see this a lot. You'll see verses in the New Testament could have already had a fulfillment in the Old. That you could use Jeremiah to talk about the impending doom of Jerusalem when it's completely out of place. Jeremiah was talking about the destruction of the first temple. So maybe the apostle could use Isaiah to talk about the Syrians, or I mean, what happened with the Syrians, to talk about what's going on in his own life. because that's how Paul would do it. But here we have Saul. This chapter 26 is called Saul's life spared again. So no, I don't think it means the grave's life was spared again. So I think that his name is Grave, and that's, I think, more because that's a literary. These names all have literary purpose. But I like how it's written because, like, for instance, if I were to just say, oh, the Hyksos priests lost power to the Idumeans, that would just be that. But if you have this story of Samuel, you can understand how quickly this happened. If it happened in one generation, that they were replaced, the Israel was replaced in one generation by the Judahites. And this is what the New Testament authors do a lot. They talk about how this generation, meaning the Judahites that were rebelling against Rome, how they were going to be blind and not accept much the way that Saul was doing here. So if the Egyptians can lose their futures, the Benjaminites can, the Jebusites, and everyone else, then that's the argument of the New Testament. Is the argument is basically the story of the prodigal son. It's, yes, you were here working all day in the vineyard, but you were still supposed to listen to the one who was to come. And who is this one to come? The one that said that the temple would be destroyed. Well, there were people that stayed in that temple until it burned, refusing to let the New World Order affect them. And they paid the ultimate price. And Josephus implored them to change their ways, and not really did this go over too well. It kind of was seen as a zero-sum game. We'll lose our way of life if we just continue to let them bring in their way of life. We need to exclude them, keep them out of here. And so they locked the door, basically, and bunkered down in the temple, and would rather see it burn than to let the Romans have it. And this literally happened. It was a very dark day, very reminiscent of the siege from the Syrians in the north and the siege of the Babylonians in the south. And it wasn't good for anybody. It should have never happened. It would have been better if it had never happened. But history is pretty brutish. But yeah, it says right here in 1 Samuel 26 that the Lord, that David's saying, hey, our Lord is Saul. So when the Lord does something to his Lord, this doesn't necessarily mean God. It could mean a person, but it's definitely two. There's definitely two people in this kind of wording. You've not guarded your Lord, the Lord's anointed. Go look, where are the king's spear and water jug that he has in his head? It was in his head. All right, and I wanted to read a couple more I'll just read one more. Leave it at that. I'm not going to say too much more in any of my videos. I think I've made my point, which I should have done a long time ago, because I've had reason to believe that Israel was the Gentiles, and they were replaced by the Judahites. And this changed when the Idumeans became powerful. And these are people that were kind of kicked out. They, maybe they'd flown out the handle, which means like kind of like Cain. Like Cain isn't like Lamech. Lamech is more like the desert dwellers that had these strict rules about chastity and purity and innocence and stuff like that. That these really patriarchal kind of systems that aren't really fair, but are law based. So that's when Lamech, who is the ancestor of Lot and Abraham, because when you see in Genesis 4, it says he's the father of all the people, or rather his ancestors are the father. So basically his uncles are all those who have livestock and dwell in tents and wander the desert and so on. So, well, that's what these guys were. That's what they were. Even David, same. And so when so this is when David took over, and Israel lost its position, and Israel became a foreigner. Ammon became a foreigner. All of David's subjects were Hebrews that were under his thumb, so he was able to control them. If he wanted a wife from any of these people, he could be like David Crush up in there. And so it says here in First Chronicles, but like I said, I want to really get into the New Testament. I got maybe a couple more places in Psalms, but other things. But other than that, I'm getting to the New Testament, and then I'm moving on. No more Bible talks from me. So First Chronicles 21 and the verse is 12. First Chronicles 21 and the verse is 12. Will it be 3 years of famine or 3 months of fleeing your enemies with the sword of your foes at your back, or 3 days of the Lord's own sword, a pestilence in the land, with the Lord's destroying angel? So pestilence meant the Lord did it. So like when the Egyptians were destroyed by pestilence, that was in this to the chronicler, the Lord. And in verse 15 said, God also sent an angel to destroy Jerusalem, but as he was on the point of destroying it, the Lord saw and decided against the calamity and said to the destroying angel, enough now, stay your hand. So this destroying angel that killed the Egyptians was going to kill David's nation. But I thought, Judah has some seed that needs to live on, and God would never do that to Judah. Not to mention Ezekiel and Jeremiah say that could happen, and it did happen. But all that sea talk, the New Testament is trying to tell you that, yeah, there was that sea talk. That happened. But it's not what you think. What that all was just to explain how Jesus Christ got onto this earth. That's it. That's the long and short of it. I don't think that's what they originally meant. And that's what I was trying to tell you about my Lord said to my Lord. Just because the New Testament said that, just because Daniel's 70 weeks are talked about in the New Testament, that doesn't mean that was the fulfillment to the people of the Old Testament. And the people of the Old Testament, it's kind of irrelevant. They all either became Christian or Jewish. There is no kind of continuous movement in the area with that temple, with that practice. It doesn't exist. And a lot of people are going to try to recreate it, but that's more of that newspaper eschatology. They believe so much in this kind of stuff that they want to create it to happen again. But that's not the point of it. You got to look at it in its context to understand what it means. All right, peace out.